Hello, hello, hello. My name is Felix. I'm from Ledger, and we're going to be answering some of your questions here today. So if you guys haven't done this before, I'm sure you guys would have. You can just pop your questions into chat and we'll try to answer all those as best we can. I always mention, don't give out your 24 words. Don't sign any transactions you don't trust. And we'll get right into it today, seeing as it seems to be we seem to have quite a few of your questions out there. So first thing I see would be from City Jesper. You mentioned hello when the Ledger Stacks team. When Ledger Stacks, we have waited since December pre-mint, and so if you've gotten the NFT, yes, I totally understand. It has been some time. I don't have any time frame, and I actually saw Crypto Angel. Just wanted to check you talk about it as well. Unfortunately, I don't have any time frame for when those are going to be out specifically. As Crypto Angel pointed out, there is a delay, but I wouldn't. We just want to make sure we have the best product for you guys to send out to you guys. If I had more information, I'd be able to. I'd be shouting it out from the rooftops. So keep an eye out. We just want to make sure it is as good as it can be. Sorry, I can't give you guys more with that one. But we'll try to answer as many questions as we get here today. So next up, we have enough said. You've mentioned, are you able to change your 24-word recovery phrase or phrase to a different batch of words? And technically, you can get a new recovery phrase, but it wouldn't mean that the recovery phrase, the addresses that you're managing your assets with, would stay the same. All the addresses that you manage your assets with are going to be derived from basically a public-private key pair, and from that, the recovery phrase, right? So if you have a different recovery phrase, you're going to have a different address, enough said. So if you change it, so let's say you have a device, it's set up with a specific recovery phrase, you can get a new recovery phrase and move those assets over to the new addresses that you might generate based on that new 24 words. So you'll have new addresses that you'll manage from there. So hopefully that does answer your question, enough said. Next up, Lucas, you mentioned you had a technical problem. Please pop it into chat. I see it down below. I'm going to read it out now. You've mentioned you're currently having trouble with Trust Wallet account. You mentioned not being able to sync. I might need more details than that. In particular, if I remember correctly, I'm just going to double check now. I am just checking if last time, it has been some time since I used Trust Wallet, but if I remember correctly, it had to use, you had to input your recovery phrase, but I do remember there being an addition of Ledger support. There we go. Import and add. Let's have a look here. So this is just from their website, Trust Wallet. So it looks like it's the beta release at the moment, but it looks like it's for the extension. So if it's on the mobile, if you're going to have to add a recovery phrase in, that would defeat the purpose of you managing your assets with a hardware wallet. So not something we'd recommend there in general. But it might be something that would be better if you get a hold of us for. Something I always mention, support.ledger.com. And then we can actually go through in detail. And you can also obviously get a hold of Trust Wallet support as well. There will be a link right behind where my video would be. A purple contact us button, and you can have a look from there as well, Lucas, with regards to that. But as far as I can see, it might just be me really skimming through, might just be with the extension at this stage. All right. So next question comes from Enough Said. Oh yes, that is the same question with the 24 words. But feel free to continue on if you have any more questions for that. Next up, we had Amir You've mentioned when will we solve BP20 tokens problem. So I'm assuming what might be happening for you is if you can't see the broadcast of the transactions for a BP20 token. If that is the case, I'd normally actually suggest using a third-party wallet, something like MetaMask, Rabby, Tahoe, in the meantime, just so you can manage your assets as well. And you should be able to send and receive as you might normally as well. If you have a transaction that's actually stuck, that being you can't see the transaction broadcast on, let's say, if I jump back here, let's say Etherscan, for example, or a BSC scan, actually, sorry. Now that I'm talking about BP20 tokens, then you can actually replace the broadcast of the transaction with a zero value transaction of the same nonce. It sounded a little bit like gibberish there, but we do have a Help Center article here you can check out that you can actually rebroadcast the transaction and then make sure you can manage those assets. But don't have a time frame. My understanding was that a lot of it should be solved already, but obviously get a hold of us if you still having issues. We'll try to help you out with that one for sure. But I do have assets on BSC, BP20 tokens, and more. I seem to be working okay on my end, so might be good to either give it a test or replace any stuck transactions with this method in particular if you need to as well. Might be something to keep in mind there. All right, next up we had Claire Withrow. You mentioned that you moved your crypto onto, I'm assuming you mean Ledger Live, and one thing I'll mention is remember that the assets aren't in Ledger Live and they aren't on the device, but they're on chain, and it's just the recovery phrase that's on the device. So I wanted to just preface your question with that little tidbit there. But you mentioned you're not sure how to keep your Ledger Nano X safe, or how your Ledger Nano X keeps it safe. Is it just a unique address that keeps it safe, or does it need to be moved onto a Ledger Nano X? Okay. My first probably best thing to go through in terms of how your device keeps things safe is just to go through this article. I normally just type where are my coins, Ledger Academy, and should bring it up for you. Now, what is the specific thing that keeps your assets safe with a Ledger Nano X? It's because the recovery phrase, and it's the thing that creates the private keys that you sign the transactions with, that always stays on the device. So whenever you're signing transactions with MetaMask, with Solflare, with Phantom, with any third-party wallet, with Ledger Live especially as well, those wallets ask the Ledger device to sign a transaction. The unsigned transaction goes to the Ledger device. The Ledger device looks at it. You're confirming it on the screen that you have with the Ledger device, making sure it matches what you expect it to be, and you accept it to sign the transaction, right? And because the recovery phrase, so hoping definitely that you're not storing your recovery phrase, on like a cloud service, you're not storing it on your phone as a photo, something like that. If that happens, you're not keeping your recovery phrase safe, as safe as it could be, because if someone were to get a hold of or to compromise your phone, for example, where the photo is, or the cloud service, they could just take that recovery phrase and manage it as if they were you, right? So going back to how the Ledger device signs the transactions, because nothing else has that recovery phrase and therefore can derive those private keys, that's how you know you're the only one that can sign the transactions for a specific address where you keep your asset, where that publicly own those assets on the chain. Hopefully that answers your question, Claire. I might have rambled a little bit with that one, but basically it's the recovery phrase that keeps it safe, being that you're the only one that knows the recovery phrase. That's probably the quickest way that I'd normally be putting it. And because the ledger device is the only thing that has a recovery phrase and can sign transactions, you'll be safe in that way. But definitely ask some follow-up questions if I might not have mentioned something you might be thinking about at all. Definitely want to answer and get in depth as much as I can with that one. It's a really good question. Next up, we have 21st century business. You mentioned, are we able to create different addresses to receive to? So we're not always sending deposits to the same addresses. 100% you can. What I'm going to do, I'm going to bring up my Ledger Live, for example. And if I want to, let's say I want to add a new, let's say a new Binance Smart Chain address, right? I can just go to Binance Smart Chain and then we can just continue to add. I have my device connected, but it is not open. So I'm just going to enter my PIN and then open up the corresponding app as well. It'll actually tell you on the device that which app it's going to open. And then you can just add the addresses from there. This is pretty much what it is going to be for EVM chains. So what I mean by that, generally speaking, they're going to be addresses that start with 0x, right? So you can create as many addresses as you want, but Ledger Live, to keep it simple, only allows you to add one address that does not have a transaction on it. If you want to create lots of different addresses to receive to without going through that process, or create being an operative word there, or to actually see those addresses, you can use again something like MetaMask, which actually has a full list of it shows you a list of 5, and then you go into the next page and next page to actually see those addresses. MetaMask, Ethereum, just to, if you guys are not aware, this would be the steps that you can follow to do that as well. If I remember correctly, the steps, here is what you're going to see, and you're going to see something like this with a bunch of addresses that you can potentially look through to use as well. Obviously, if you use an address that's really far down though, so if you go next page, next page, next page, you might have trouble getting that added in to Ledger Live, because Ledger Live looks for a specific amount of addresses. But yes, you can add as many addresses as you want, considering especially if you're sending and receiving to those addresses a lot. So definitely something you can do for EVM, and it is part of the process of how a UTXO style network would work. So something like Bitcoin, which creates lots of addresses to send and receive from. So that is already built in. So I'm sure that if you've used Bitcoin within the Ledger Live ecosystem, it should have been something you've experienced before. But you do have a follow-up. You mentioned you have 2 transactions that you successfully sent via Etherscan, but the funds never arrive. Address and network are correct, and you've sent the funds using the same details in the past, and funds had arrived. So the first thing I'd want to check there is where you're sending them from, because I definitely shouldn't be able to send anything via Etherscan as far as I'm aware. There is no send receive function. The second thing would be I'd want to get a transaction ID. Once you have a transaction ID, we 100% come to something like Etherscan. You can see here is my instance of Etherscan. And let's say, if you don't have a ENS domain, it's okay. I just like to use Vitalik's as an example. But we can then, I'm going to get should have gotten a transaction ID. Let's grab one really quickly. And we can just search it up the top here. So let's just grab a random one. And this is the transaction ID. We can just search it straight here, and we can just try to find it. If nothing appears though, then it's about checking in with how you sent it. So if you sent it from a Ledger device, we might want to see where it is within Ledger Live, what would have happened there. That's kind of how I would start thinking about that 21st century business. But definitely wanted to check that with you because you said sent via Etherscan. Oh no, you're not. You said I'm confirming the transaction. You can see the you can give it the transaction hash now. I wouldn't want to do that live 21st century. It would be something I'd probably raise a case with us for. You can drop the case number with us for sure, and then I'll actually pick it up to actually have a look through that with you, so that we can go through that, and then you don't have to post a transaction ID. A lot of times as well, the transaction IDs will actually make that your message won't be seen by me. So you mentioned then every time I send from MetaMask to Ledger Nano addresses, won't I be sending to the same address on Ledger Live? Okay, yeah, drop the case number 21st. Every time I send, won't I still be sending to the same address on Ledger Live? If you used the Connect Hardware Wallet a feature, yes, you might have the same address that you're sending to and from, right? And you would be sending to yourself if you're sending to the same address, right? 100%. All right, let me pick that up. Let me just write that to myself. So one thing to note is that because Ledger Live, I just mentioned it to Claire before, because Ledger Live doesn't actually hold the assets, the Ledger device doesn't hold the assets, just because you're using the Connect Hardware Wallet feature with MetaMask, means that you're looking at the same address on Ledger Live as you are on MetaMask, as you are on Etherscan. Everyone's looking at the same chain. It's just up to which interaction or which wallet or which interface you might be using to manage those assets. But it might be easier for me to have a look at that personally on the case for your 21st century. I'm just going to send that to myself right now before I forget. There we go. But I'll have a look at that right after the stream, and we can go from there. Oh, looks like you've got multiple, but I'll assign those all to me accordingly. All right. Next up, Crypto Angel again. I know I mentioned it before, but yeah, wish I could give you more of a time frame with that one. Unfortunately, don't have anything more specific. But please stay tuned. We'll get it out to you as soon as we feel that it is ready, the best for you guys. So next up, looks like we have Nico Bit. You mentioned, hi there, any new language to be added to Ledger Live apps anytime soon? Nothing that I know of at the moment, as far as I'm aware. I wish I could say more, because it is something that does hinder a lot of users. I totally understand, but it's not something that I'm 100% aware of right now, but definitely something that they have on the horizon. So keep an ear out. I'm not sure about that in particular. Now, Shaolin 15, you've mentioned. Can we get a little more clarification on the 25th word / passphrase? Can I use two different passphrases, and will they generate two different sets of wallets? Can I input the passphrase in another ledger? Right. Amazing question. I love this question because the passphrase isn't something that a lot of people use. So I normally like to use the word passphrase. I don't use the word 25th word because it's a bit weird and it mixes up with other things. Let me just jump back. Passphrase, ledger support. Okay. So can you use two different passphrases? 100%. Can you use them? Can you have them both set up at the same time on the same ledger device? No. So how would it work? There's two different options that you can do, and you can see here. There's attach to pin, and there's set temporary passphrase. Okay. How do they work? When you attach it to a pin, this works in what I would consider the traditional way, where in the event of some $5 wrench attack, in the classic words, if someone came up to you and asked you or tried to force you to give you your recovery phrase or to sign a transaction with your ledger device, you potentially use this to say, hey, I am going to unlock it, and I think the article mentions it as plausible deniability. You put a little bit of money in there, enough to say, hey, I'm giving you my assets. Here you go. Please leave me alone, and then they leave you, right? This one stays on the device for as long as you want to use it, right? For as long as you're using it. It actually is deterministic. And so the next question you mentioned was, can you input, another question rather, is can I input the passphrase into another ledger? And 100% you can. That's exactly what it would be used for. If you, let's say, lost your device as well, you would need to enter the passphrase again. Now, you would also need to have the recovery phrase as well. So it's not like you would only use the passphrase to enter it into a ledger device. You need to have the same recovery phrase and the same passphrase, and then that way you'll be able to manage those same addresses again. The middle question you mentioned, will they generate two different sets of wallets? 100% they will as well. They'll all be related, quote unquote, in the same way that they're both derived from the same recovery phrase, but they'll both be derived also from different passphrases. So on paper, when you look on a blockchain, they'll have nothing related to each other than maybe sending between those two addresses. That's all. So just to put it simply, can you use two different passphrases, the Shaolin? 100% you can. Will they generate two different sets of wallets? 100% they will. Can you enter the passphrases into another ledger device? 100%. Just to follow up with a temporary passphrase though, that would be something, let's say, if you're really wanting to be security conscious and you want to, let's say I have I have like an address that I don't want to touch ever. I only deposit to the address. It's an Ethereum address. This is my vault, let's say. I could, for example, set a temporary passphrase, something that I remember. I could then, get add an account in Ledger Live, so that I can get the address from it. So I add the account. Let's say it's this one. It's not, but let's say it's this one. And then once I add the account in, I go through the receive process. I get the address. I jot that down. I store it. I put it a bunch of places, and now I know this is my vault address. Next time I lock and unlock the device, the passphrase that it's set up with will be quote unquote gone. So even if whatever pin I enter, it's not set to a pin. So I'll have to enter the normal pin that I enter. And I will still get back to my normal accounts, the accounts that, let's say, all of these other accounts were set up without the passphrase, but this one was. The temporary passphrase is still there. You can still manage it, but I would need to, again, set up the temporary passphrase to actually let's say, send assets from this address. Why would you set a temporary passphrase? I think the vault method is something that I've heard other people use it for in particular. So something that I send to, so you don't need private keys for, but you only occasionally want to send from, for example. That could be one way of using a temporary passphrase. So just something to keep in mind there as well. Totally not something we actually expect most users to use. You can see here we mention it's generally for advanced users, but if you understand more about it, totally something that you can use, especially when you have everything together. You can test with like little bits here and there, so you can get an idea for what you can use the passphrases for. All right, next up we have Junior Inongjin. Sorry, I'm not sure with that one. Junior, you mentioned you sent ETH to the correct address, but via the wrong network, which was Polygon. How can you fix this? You logged into your Ethereum wallet, but I don't know how to find it. So if I'm assuming you're using Ledger Live, let's say, you can just add the Polygon account and the address will be the same. The way that EVM addresses have chosen to distinguish themselves, or how it's turned out to pass, is that it's the chain ID that differentiates them. and the private key that you sign it with will be the same actually. So in this case, just actually add a Polygon account and you should be able to see the ETH. You might see it as like wrapped ETH or something like that. And if you need to bridge the funds, you might need to use a bridge or some kind of third-party service to do so. If you feel more comfortable, you can always send it back to the exchange to withdraw on Ethereum mainnet as well. So definitely shouldn't be lost. You might even be able to check it on, let's say, Polygon Scan. Enter the Ethereum address or that EVM address onto Polygon Scan, and you should see the transaction that's come in there. And then you can just add a Polygon account and you should be able to manage those assets. You just need to have some Matic or MATIC or Polygon to be able to actually manage that Ethereum, since that's the native token of that network, to get the exact wording. All right. So Lucas, okay. Oh, geez, Lucas. Okay, so you mentioned you have a technical problem restoring your Trust Wallet account after the 12-word phrase. So one thing to mention, we don't know your recovery phrase. We definitely wouldn't recommend using a phrase that you got from somewhere else. So being that you have a 12-word recovery phrase, I would imagine that you had this derived from some other software wallet. If we wouldn't be able to manage those assets at all, but if you have that recovery phrase, you should be able to import it to any compatible wallet to be able to manage those assets in general. But all the Ledger devices have been using 24 words to make just to different. I'm not sure it's not to just to differentiate, but knowing that it's a much larger potential pool of words that someone might need to guess. With that being said, though, you mentioned you needed a way to recover a recovery phrase, an account from a 12-word recovery phrase account. You should be able to find all of those steps online on how to import add an account in Trust Wallet. Might be good to check with Trust Wallet customer service. Otherwise, if you raise an account with us, we might be able to help you, point you in the right direction, but we won't have anything more that Trust Wallet wouldn't have. Trust Wallet will have the most information to help you out with that one, Lucas. So sorry I couldn't be more specific, but generally speaking, you should be able to find all of that online. Sandra Jones, you mentioned you're having an issue with MetaMask connecting to Ledger. You opened a ticket into this and you followed the steps for troubleshooting, but you still have the same issue. How do you get your NFTs and tokens off MetaMask that's connected to Ledger? So again, I think I mentioned it before, your assets are not on the MetaMask. You might have heard me before, but getting straight into it, it would really depend on what specific issue that you're having. I would imagine, let's say, if you are having an issue with the connection, if I just measure support web page ID, if you make sure that you're using web page ID to connect to MetaMask, you should be able to manage the assets accordingly. There's no reason that you need to quote unquote send it from MetaMask to Ledger Live. Remember, if you've used the Connect Hardware Wallet feature, the address that your assets are owned by will be the assets that you will be the addresses that you see in Ledger Live as well. So the addresses will be the same. If I just show this address here, will be the same address that I have up here in particular. So that wouldn't have changed for you at all. Let's just so if I just pop my password in there, you'll see the same address as well. It will be the same address rather. I know that that address here was my first Ledger address, and then that will be the same as this one here. Right, so no need to transfer between them, but if you're having the issue, the first thing with MetaMask in connecting to Ledger, that would normally be the first thing, is making sure you've selected web page ID. But if it's something else, pop off in the chat. I'll try to follow up with that one as well. Boom. All right. Let me just close off a window here. And okay, hopefully, Sandra, definitely let me know how you go. All right. If I keep going, Zhao, you've mentioned, okay, yes. All right. Sorry, guys, just trying to get back to where we were. All right. When is support available? 21st Century Business, you mentioned every time I get on there, I'm told live chat isn't available, and I email, but you have yet to get replies back. Emailed 10 to 7 days ago. I'll try to get back to you right after this 21st Century. Normally it shouldn't be that long. We've tried to close off that gap in particular. But yeah, really sorry about that. Really hate that. You've had to wait that long for a reply, so I've made sure to note that down for later. Jake Elite, you mentioned you were just wondering if I knew if the Nano Pod was waterproof. You're thinking about purchasing, but you weren't planning on putting it in the ocean or anything like that, but just in case. My understanding is it is waterproof anecdotally, but it's not, what's the word? It's not like IP64 rated or anything like that in particular. So we don't have that rating for the Nano Pod. So let me actually, because there are a couple. I'm assuming that you mean the one that has a screw top, if I remember correctly. Boom. If we go here. There we go. If it's this one, I wouldn't. I don't remember so, but this one should be anecdotally waterproof, without the certification. So yes, again, excuse me. I'm assuming a few splashes should be fine, but that one, yeah, we wouldn't necessarily recommend going into the ocean with. Okay, Zhao, you mentioned, Pedro, you mentioned you're having some problems. You swap Ethereum for Gala. Now, you mentioned Inside Ledger Live, and the money is gone. So the first thing would be that who would you have used the swap with? Being that we don't actually perform or provide any swap services ourselves. So if I jump onto Swap right now, you can see here, actually, I will, let's say, boom. You can see here we've got Changerly, and there will be other potential services. So if you use something like Changerly, for example, then that would potentially change how we're going to try and troubleshoot the issue. Generally speaking, you'd want to go to the service provider. They might potentially need to do some KYC, for example, or something like that. So definitely something to consider. You might need to double check that. That's the first thing that would come to mind, Zhao. I hope I'm not butchering your name, but that would be the first thing that I'd consider with regards to if your swap funds have not arrived yet. All right. Okay, Lucas. Again, we've got to go to Trust Wallet Service support. They should be able to help you out with that one. Now, next up, we have, let's go. Zhao, also, if you have already raised a case with us, just pop it in the chat, the case number, and I'll see if I can have a look at it. But generally speaking, the first things that I'll think of would be what I just mentioned there. All right, Paper Doll, you mentioned you sent Gala from Coinbase to a Ledger device, or a Ledger managed address to be very specific, but you don't see it in Ledger Live. You do see it in Etherscan on the Ethereum wallet. How do I get it into my Ledger? So if you've sent it to the correct address, it would already be managed by the Ledger. So that would be all good there. Does it involve MetaMask? Is there a simpler way? So first thing I'm actually going to double check would be our crypto asset list. I remember we made, one of my colleagues actually made this a lot easier to look through. It's not actually even on the supported tokens page, but I will jump on there. This is one of the ways you can check of what assets are supported. It isn't there, but let me just jump on here. So this is the support page. If you guys have any questions, normally this is going to be a really good way to see if your question already has something to run to be able to guide you through. Okay, so created this list. If I remember correctly, Gala should be one of the assets that you'll be able to use. And yes, if you've got, my bad, not the P tokens Gala, but Gala on Ethereum mainnet. Definitely should be something that you should be able to see in Ledger Live. So if you just added the Ethereum account, it should appear. An alternative definitely would be to use MetaMask to manage the assets, but definitely should appear directly within Ledger Live. Something might be going wrong if you're not seeing it. Not that the assets would be gone necessarily, but maybe we need to make sure you're on the latest Ledger Live. Might require a clearing of the cache potentially. Next things I'd consider would be what network it was sent from, that kind of thing. Normally the main things, oh no, you already mentioned you see it on Etherscan, so that's good. But yes, that would be the first two things that I'd be thinking of in particular. Otherwise, definitely get a hold of us. We might need to get your logs, something that we would use to see what would be happening on the back end of Ledger Live, but wouldn't allow us to manage the assets at all, paper doll. So if you've done that, definitely try to get a hold of us. We'll see if we can give you a hand from there. All right. So George Levison, next you mentioned, how do you get your NFTs from on OpenSea onto Ledger Live? You wouldn't need to do anything to move something from OpenSea to Ledger Live necessarily. If an asset is owned, if an NFT, let's say, is owned by a specific address, you should be able to see that within Ledger Live anyway. It just might depend on what network that you have the NFT on. So if it's on Polygon, if it's on something like that, or on Ethereum, for example, it'll definitely appear. But you've got it on a different network, let's say Solana or Binance Smart Chain, it might not appear for you within Ledger Live. You can still manage it with OpenSea, but it wouldn't necessarily need to go from OpenSea to Ledger Live. Ledger Live would just be a way to look at the NFTs that an address may own, right? So just something to consider there. So Ricardo, you mentioned when Lido upgrade. I'm not sure what you mean by that. If you're talking about withdrawing your assets, if you're staking with Lido, or you have STETH, Lido's implementation of staking, then you can just swap it out. In particular, you actually don't need to have an upgrade to withdraw your assets. But if you can go into more detail, I'll definitely try to answer that as well. Again, next we have Marco Momich. You mentioned if we have XRP on a Ledger managed address, how can we receive an airdrop of Corium? I actually might need to double check that. Not something that I'd remember right off the top of my head, because you might need to follow whatever prerequisites, first of all, that you would have done with regards to Corium. And if you've followed those steps, then you should receive the airdrop. Shouldn't, if I remember correctly, need any additional steps, but let's have a look here. This is just to connect to Corium mainnet. So it might be something I might need to get a hold of you for, Marco. Not something I have right off the top of my head, but if you want to raise a case, we should be able to get back to you on that for sure. But generally speaking, airdrops are just what they sound like, airdrops. They drop it straight into your address, and shouldn't be required to do anything actually. All right. Next up, we have MG. You mentioned can you tell me if it's true that Ledger integrates an emulator in the future? There are posts on Twitter about it. Not sure what you mean by emulator. Let me just double check. I'm not sure if you might mean, I don't know, to play games on or something like that. I think that was a joke by one of our Bitcoin developers. Let's have a look here. Don't want to call you out here, but no, that was actually a real one. So not 100% sure what you might have meant by that in particular, MG. If you can go in more detail, I'll try to have a look at that in particular. Okay, let's keep going. I might have to go a bit quick since I've already gone quite a while. I've only got 20 minutes left. Might have to smash through these questions. You mentioned 21st century. Every time you send from MetaMask to Ledger Nano, it won't I still be sending to from the same address in Ledger Live? Well, no, I already read this. Here we go. Where are you, Marco? Okay, got the case number. All right. So Fear Generation, I sent some of my NFTs to my Ledger from my Coinbase wallet. The last 5 are showing up on my OpenSea account as sent, but I don't see them in the Ledger Live account. Yes, first thing, I think I mentioned before what network they'd be sent on in particular, and might have to consider it from there. At the moment, Ledger Live only supports Ethereum and Binance Smart not Binance Smart Chain, sorry, Polygon in particular, NFTs that you might be able to see. All right. So Ledger, hello Ledger, for when the solution for the 4 and 8 XRP. So it might be an error message that you're getting when you're sending XRP, let's say on mobile. The solution, the workaround for now might be that you need to use a desktop to actually manage the assets at this time, or you can just verify the assets on XRP scan. You can enter your address there. You can see here, you can just double check that as well. We have an ongoing page for that. Dennis, sorry, I didn't mention your name. And we'll try to fix that as soon as we can. Okay, just might go to the bottom, see if we can get as many questions as we can. Blum, 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 blum. Yeah, my problems are with Coinbase as well. I spent hours on support with their team. They keep telling me to check with Ledger support. This is you, 21st Century Business. Just gonna double check all of your questions here. Have them. So hopefully I'll get a hold of you, 21st Century, and we'll have a chat about what's happening there. I'll look through everything that you mentioned. All right. So, Shalin, you've got a follow-up that your concern as crypto grows, more use Ledger Nano S. You're feeling like someone may get your recovery phrase. 8 billion people use, if 8 billion people use the Ledger Nano S, it's possible they accidentally get your 24 words. This is a question we get a lot. Now, even with 8 billion is really small in terms of the number of addresses and recovery phrase combinations you might have. Minuscule, absolutely, totally minuscule. So totally not something you should be worried about there, Shaolin. There is a Ledger Academy article about it. Recovery phrase, I think, is the one. This should be it, and it goes into, it gives you the number, and it's a number that has that. Yeah, here we go. This is the number of possible combinations. It's more than 8 billion, because 8 billion would be what? That's a million. That would be a billion, right? So it's way, 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 way more than 8 billion. So definitely not something we worry about there, Shalin. Let's keep going before I run out of time. Web dev, you mentioned, is there a quick way to move all assets from an existing software wallet to a ledger? Just depends on the software wallet. Generally speaking, there are services that you can use within Ledger Live, but wouldn't be something that would be compatible with the software wallet. You'd actually have to be sending them individually, generally speaking. It's annoying, but yeah, just part of the game. And otherwise, you might be, letting other smart contracts manage your assets. Not really something we'd want to recommend anyway, as well. Next, Abby Lynn Humphrey, can you validate a ledger being authentic if we bought it off Amazon? 100% we can. Whenever you use Ledger Live, or whenever you go through the onboarding process within Ledger Live, it'll actually check whether your ledger is authentic, or if it has been tampered with. So no worries about that at all. Next up, we have Himmel. Any news on the stacks? It's been 2 months since last communication, and they said a couple of months of delay in the mail. No, I wish we had more info for you, mate. Definitely, we'll try to push that up the line to make sure we give you as much information as we can, but nothing at this stage. Here we have question everything. I'm just going to jot down that ticket number that you've given us. Boom. But you've mentioned the previous message you had on your Ledger Nano S was a bootloader, and the screen was extremely dim. Now, after having your Ledger plugged into power for 2 days, all that comes on the screen is a square. I'll have a look at the case. We might need to check what the device looks like and everything like that, question everything. Otherwise, we'll see if it's still within warranty, if we can, get you a new device, if we can get you some kind of way to still manage assets, especially if you have your recovery phrase, you'll be all set. But I'll definitely have a look at that case for you as well. Pamela Jackson, you mentioned you're having an issue trying to transfer funds from your Ledger managed address to Coinbase, and you keep getting a message that something went wrong. It won't verify this transfer. If something went wrong, there might be more of a message there. If there's more of a message, if it might say like wrong private keys for account, if it might say if you don't have enough funds to pay for transaction fees, something like that, might help us try to troubleshoot that. In particular, those are probably the main things that I'd be thinking of in particular as the most common. But obviously, it might not be what's happening for you in particular. Chu Wolfois, you mentioned, is it possible to change a seed phrase and maintain the address in case the ledger is suspected to be compromised? No, it is not. If your seed phrase is compromised because the ledger hasn't been compromised, I've never seen it being compromised. If the recovery phrase has been compromised, then the addresses are compromised. You can't change the address you can't change the recovery phrase that address is derived from, being that the address is derived from the recovery phrase, fortunately. If your accounts might be compromised, definitely get a hold of us. We can try to work with law enforcement if that's the case. Otherwise, if you suspect it to be the case, just transfer your assets out onto a new address. And then that way you can be sure that the recovery phrase has never been on any digital device at all. Paper Doll, just to follow up, you mentioned, yes, you did send Gala to the right address. So it's your Ledger Ethereum address, and it was sent through Ethereum network. So you put in a ticket. Just want to see if you can get a quick answer here. Yeah, if you have that, doesn't seem like you have popped the case number down there, but definitely do so I can actually have a look at that. We can double check that. I might not be able to help. I might have to direct you on to, like, let's say if you did it with Changelly, it might it's not the going too fast. Okay, no, it's not that one, but definitely we can have a look at the transaction ID, just make sure everything's on correct, and it might be an issue depending on who it might be. So definitely want to have a look at that. We might need more information. Flavio F, Ledger is the best way to secure your crypto. It is obviously biased, so definitely make sure you look at everything. But yes, personally, I couldn't think of a better way to secure your assets. There are some things that you got to work around in terms of, it's a bit of a smaller screen, so sometimes it might not be as convenient to look at there, but the secure screen is exactly what you need to verify that you're signing the transactions correctly, and that you're not, sending them to another address in the event, let's say, for example, that your computer is compromised. You can actually use Ledger Live with a Ledger device if your computer is compromised, as long as you check the transaction is exactly what you expect it to be on the Ledger device. Obviously, we wouldn't recommend having your computer compromised, but something that I'm not sure if you guys knew. All right, does Ledger support Myria token yet? Let me go to the list. Not something that I've heard of, Myria. And we can double check that for you. That was for you, Olimide. It does not look like it's the case. You can jump, if you're a developer, or if you know one of the developers, you can jump onto our developer portal and we can get that added in for you, or looked to be added in for you. Excuse me. All right, next question, Pamela Jackson. I went to the website and restored the nano keys with the recovery phrase, and I still, please, yes, we would never recommend you put your recovery phrase anywhere. If you've entered your recovery phrase, Pamela, that is a fraudulent website. What I'd recommend right now, Pamela, is you move all of your assets away to a temporary address, because that is someone trying to look at to compromise your assets. Pamela, hopefully I might have caught you in time, because there's no way we'd ever ask for your recovery phrase ever. Please get a hold of us if you need any help with getting that set up. There should be live chat on right now. I know 21st Century, you mentioned when is live chat available. Should be available business hours for EU and US. We generally have live chat available. So if you can get a hold of us, Pamela, we'll try to run you through that, but we would never ask for your recovery phrase. So if you went to a website that's purporting to be us and restored your keys or entered your recovery phrase, it's a fraudulent website. I'm really stressed now, because that is not what we want to happen. We would never ask the recovery phrase. It is probably the most important part of managing your assets. I always mention it initially. Never give out your 24 words, even to us. We will never ask for it. Please get a hold of us, Pamela, if you need any help. All right, keep going. Will Ledger support Pulse Chain Network once it goes to mainnet? You can liaise with you can have the developers liaise with us if they aren't already, to actually have us support that. You can submit an application to get that supported, depending on what kind of if it's a token, if it's another layer 1, that kind of thing. MG, you mentioned you have 2 Ledger Nano X's you bought 2 years ago, which are still closed in the box. Do I have to open them for the update? I don't want to use them yet. 100%. You would have to open them for the update, and you want to plug them in to update them in particular. Wally K, you mentioned, would it be a good idea for us to segregate our assets into multiple devices, assigning one device for minting and then one moving to another device with a separate account? No, actually, you don't need to have multiple devices necessarily. You can just use multiple addresses. As long as you keep the recovery phrase safe, no reason to have multiple devices, but it is a convenience factor. So I have a Ledger Nano S Plus, I have a Ledger Nano X. Obviously, it's different for me, but the way I use that is I use the Ledger Nano X on the go, and I use the Ledger Nano S Plus at home. But they both have the same recovery phrase, and the different addresses is how I separate what I mint with, what I and what I may use as a vault, what I may use as a transactional address, that kind of thing. So there's absolutely no reason why you'd need to do that. You can just use the one address, one device, but multiple devices definitely helps in terms of convenience. If you also mentioned, can I link these multiple accounts, mine and yours and your mother's, to Ledger Live? And if so, does it defeat the entire reason to keep assets segregated? The assets being on different addresses are segregated, generally speaking. If you have different recovery phrases, then if one of the recovery phrases is compromised, then the other isn't. So that's how they'd be segregated in a way. But I wouldn't want to go in with the assumption that your recovery phrase would ever be compromised anyway. So I think it's kind of a moot point to actually have multiple recovery phrases, generally speaking. I do that myself, to be honest. It's just a thing just to have different things. One, the separate recovery phrase, actually, to give you guys a better idea, I actually use for my security key. So FIDO2, I use to sign into Windows computers, that kind of thing. It doesn't actually hold any crypto assets, but it's how it generates the randomness there. So in terms of answering your question, Wally K, yes, you can definitely add multiple accounts. You can definitely add multiple accounts to Ledger Live. You can add multiple accounts with multiple recovery phrases. You would just be able to see it all in that single instance of Ledger Live. So no worries about that there. All right, Chu Wei Fua, same issue, Pamela, how to contact you. So how to contact us would be support.ledger.com. And there's a contact us button just behind me where my video would be. Pamela, you did follow up. You didn't give out the recovery phrase. I went through the steps to reset your Ledger Nano X with the recovery phrase. Okay, great. Really, really glad. I was really worried there. Might have misread what you wrote in particular. So definitely something we can follow up with you about. Because if you're getting, let's say, the wrong private keys for account, it might be that you've got a new recovery phrase, for example. If that's the case, we need to reset it with the the original recovery phrase you used to add the account in particular. That's the first thing that comes to mind, but I'm not necessarily saying that's exactly what you might be fixing your issue. But again, same with Chiu. Get a hold of us. We might be able to run you through in much more detailed steps as opposed to me speaking about the generalities of it all. Support.ledger.com. Just behind me, there'll be a contact us button. And just might finish up, guys. Only got another 2 minutes. So Joseph William Exquisite, you mentioned that you have a new Ledger Nano X and the barrier won't charge. You're ready to the FAQ, update the firmware, no luck. What are the next steps? Just get a hold of us, we'll replace the device. Pretty simple. We'll try to get that out to you ASAP, and then that way you can start managing your assets as soon as you can. So definitely not something we think is a good, not the best experience, obviously, but yeah, want to get that replaced for you. Wally K, thank you for doing this live. No, thank you guys for the questions today. It's been really some really cool questions that I've tried to answer. If you guys want me to answer any of your tickets as well, please just pop them in the chat, the ticket numbers. I'll actually try to pick them up right after this and have a look through them. And we'll try to get your questions answered as well. We want to get you guys safe, keep you guys safe. So please don't give out your 24 words. I know, Pamela, you said you didn't, but then I can get the ticket number from you, and hopefully I can run you through exactly what could be happening for you, Pamela, and we'll go from there. Let's finish up. I can see a couple last minute questions. Jael, you mentioned in Etherscan, I can see that the money went to the ledger, managed address, but the money went out and didn't go in, and everything is correct. Again, might need to double check that in the ticket. I'll grab the transaction ID and we'll have a look at that for you. And obviously who you transferred, who you swapped with, and everything like that. Next up we have, and just to finish up, because I am running out of time, I have an issue, TRX, since you updated Ledger Live, unsupported derivation. When you try to send BTC from your Ledger wallet, definitely get a hold of us for that one, guys. And that way we can actually run you through any steps we need to. Worst case scenario, you can use Electrum to manage the assets in the meantime. So thanks again, guys. I am already out of time, but you can tune in tomorrow on Twitter. We have something for tech updates, and then on Thursday we'll have something in office, and we'll try to have a chat with you. JO and 21st Century, get a hold of us at support.ledger.com. Bottom right hand side, contact us and we'll have a chat with you guys. And guys, stay safe in the markets out there. Don't give out your 24 words, and have a great rest of the week. Catch us either on YouTube or Twitter every day. Thanks again. Have a good week.